So I want you to really put yourself in this situation for a second. Just imagine this. It is the spring of 1519.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And you are one of 600 completely terrified, just utterly exhausted men standing on this sweltering foreign beach. And you are literally watching your only way home burn down to the waterline.
Just a completely terrifying concept.
Oh, it's a nightmare. I mean, really put yourself in their boots. You're standing on the shores of Mexico. You've just crossed this massive, violent ocean. You're surrounded by this totally unknown, potentially hostile continent. And you are watching the heavy wooden hulls of your own ships, like the actual vessels that brought you there, just being completely consumed by fire.
Yeah, you can practically smell the smoke.
Exactly. The smoke is filling your lungs. You hear the sound of cracking timber echoing off the water. But here's the truly insane part about all this. This wasn't an enemy attack.
Right.
Their own commander gave the order to torch the fleet. There was no backup plan, no retreat. It was literally, succeed or be destroyed.
It is easily one of the most visceral, terrifying, and honestly magnificent moments in recorded history. I mean, it perfectly encapsulates this feeling that we as a species have been trying to capture with words for centuries.
Yeah, that extreme edge of human experience.
Exactly. We possess this really deep evolutionary instinct to try and define the exact psychological terror and the thrill of stepping completely outside the boundaries of the known world.
And that is exactly what we are decoding in today's deep dive. We are exploring the language of the epic journey, because what we have in front of us today is essentially this highly specialized linguistic curriculum focused on advanced English idioms.
But, and we should clarify this right away, we are not just reading a dictionary today.
Oh, definitely not. Nobody wants that. No, here's where it gets really interesting. We are treating these phrases as a psychological roadmap.
A roadmap for survival, really.
Right. We are looking at 8 spectacular supervisual metaphors drawn from, the age of discovery, from ancient mythological engineering, the brutality of medieval justice, and the deep, dark wilderness. And our mission today is to understand not just what these phrases mean on a surface level, but the vivid and frankly often violent history and the deep cognitive neuroscience behind them.
Which is so fascinating because when you analyze these 8 specific phrases, they aren't just random, disconnected expressions of ambition or fear.
Right, they actually connect.
They do.
Right.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, together they form a perfect sequential blueprint of the human experience. Specifically, they basically outline the hero's journey.
Which is that classic narrative arc.
Exactly. The arc that takes the traveler from the initial terrifying departure straight into a phase of crisis and obsession, then through a crucible of brutal environmental tests, and finally to this ultimate, often precarious resolution.
So, to you listening right now, whether you are staring down the barrel of a massive career pivot, or maybe you're in the middle of taking a huge, terrifying risk, or honestly, even if you are just insanely curious about how the language we speak literally shapes the reality we perceive, this deep dive is going to arm you with the conceptual frameworks to survive your own ambition.
I love that phrase, surviving your own ambition.
It's true, though. We're going to unpack how the human brain processes the terror of the unknown and how our ancestors gave us the vocabulary to actually navigate it.
And I mean, every great journey, every single heroic arc, it has to begin with the exact same terrifying act, which is leaving safety behind. To step into the unknown, we have to look at the very beginning of the journey.
The starting line.
Right. We have to examine the psychological state of a person standing at the exact geographic point where the familiar world ends and the maps literally run out of ink.
Okay, let's unpack this. The departure. The first concept we need to tackle is uncharted waters. And to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to rewind to the age of discovery, so like the 15th and 16th centuries.
A completely different world.
Literally. I want you to picture the maps from that era. Forget the digital, satellite image, hyper-accurate GPS you have on your phone right now. Back then, cartographers only knew the rough, totally distorted shapes of Europe, parts of Africa, and the edges of Asia.
Yeah, the known world was incredibly small. It was just this tiny island of certainty in a massive sea of absolute ignorance. And cartographers faced a very specific, almost philosophical problem. What do you do with the blank space?
Right, because you don't just leave it empty.
No, you don't. When a map maker reaches the absolute limit of human knowledge, they rarely just leave the parchment blank, because the human brain actually possesses this deep-seated fear of empty space. It's a concept known in art and philosophy as horror vacui, We abhor a vacuum.
We just can't stand not knowing.
Exactly. So the rest of the ocean on these maps was often decorated with these terrifying, elaborate illustrations of sea monsters. I mean, you'd see massive, coiled leviathans crushing galleons, giant squids dragging sailors to the depths, and famously, that warning written in Latin on artifacts like the Hunt Lennox globe.
Oh, I know this one. Hic sunt dracones.
Yes, here be dragons.
Here be dragons. Man, it just sends a shiver down your spine hearing it. Because these oceans had never been surveyed, or to use the nautical term, they had never been charted. They were literal uncharted waters. You weren't just sailing off the edge of the map, you were sailing off the edge of human experience, straight into the mouths of the monsters your own culture had invented to fill the void.
And that literal historical reality translates so perfectly into the psychology of the modern idiom. Today, when we say someone is entering uncharted waters, we obviously aren't talking about boats.
Right, usually not.
Right. We mean they are plunging into a completely new, unfamiliar, and highly volatile situation. It's this cognitive space where there are no rules, no regulatory precedents, no past data sets to guide your decision-making. You are entirely stripped of your historical compass.
Like, imagine packing up your entire life and moving to a new country where you don't speak a single syllable of the language. You don't know the social customs, you don't know the banking system, you don't even know how to properly order a cup of coffee.
That is overwhelming.
It is. That is stepping into uncharted waters. Or, on a macro scale, imagine a healthcare company deciding to integrate autonomous artificial intelligence into their diagnostic medical devices. They're navigating absolute uncharted waters regarding patient privacy, algorithmic liability, medical ethics. And honestly, this AI example raises a really interesting modern analogy for me.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, think about the tech industry right now. AI is our modern-day blank parchment, right?
Yeah.
We're sailing into this vast technological ocean, and we have absolutely no idea where the continents are.
That's a great point.
And just like those 16th century cartographers, we are already projecting our own metaphorical sea monsters into the deep. Things like, rogue superintelligence, massive data privacy breaches, algorithmic bias, deepfake warfare. These are the modern dragons lurking in the uncharted waters of technology. But here is where I want to push back a little on this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Are these waters actually uncharted, or are we just ignoring the charts? I mean, haven't we seen disruptive technology before? The printing press, the internet?
That is a phenomenal pushback, and it actually gets to the very heart of why this idiom is so powerful. Yes, we have absolutely seen disruption before, but what makes waters truly uncharted isn't just the novelty of the technology. It's the unprecedented scale and speed of the environmental variables.
So it's how fast it's changing.
Exactly. When the printing press was invented, society had decades, if not centuries, to adjust its cultural and legal frameworks. With AI, the speed of advancement just totally outpaces our ability to draw the map. The 16th century sailor looking at a blank horizon felt the exact same psychological apprehension as a modern CEO trying to implement a totally untested, unregulated neural network.
Because neither of them has any data.
Right. You have no reliable historical data to plug into your predictive models. You just have to move forward, absorb the risk, and just hope you have the agility to handle the dragons when they inevitably surface.
Okay, so you've sailed into these uncharted waters. You've survived the initial terror of the sea monsters, and eventually the bow of your ship scrapes against sand. You hit land. But if you think the journey gets easier just because you have solid ground under your feet, you are dead wrong.
Oh, it's just getting started.
Exactly. Now, you have to physically create a path so that you don't walk in circles and die of exposure, and so the people who come after you can actually follow. So we are stepping out of the open ocean and plunging straight into the deep, dark wilderness to understand what it actually means to blaze a trail.
And to understand the sheer physical grit required here, we really have to move forward in time to the 18th century, specifically to the North American frontier.
Let's go.
Imagine the pioneers, the frontiersmen, the indigenous guides trying to navigate the massive primordial forests of the continent. I don't know if you've ever been off trail in a truly ancient, untouched forest.
Like the ones where the canopy totally blocks out the sun.
Yes, those exact ones. It is deeply, profoundly disorienting. Every single tree looks virtually identical. The light is this uniform, dim green. The ground is covered in identical brush. The human brain's spatial mapping system just gets completely overwhelmed. It is incredibly easy to lose your sense of direction entirely, wander just a few hundred yards from your camp, and literally never be seen again.
Yeah, and in the 18th century, getting lost in those woods wasn't just, an inconvenience. It was a death sentence.
Absolutely.
So to ensure they could find their way back and to actually map a route for the settlers who would eventually follow them, these explorers carried heavy iron axes. And as they walked, they would stop and violently chop small, distinct pieces of bark off the trunks of the trees, right at eye level.
Right, stripping away the outer layer.
Because when you strip away that dark, rough, mossy outer bark of a tree, you expose the inner cambium layer, the wood underneath, which is often this bright, stark white. In the gloom of a dense forest, that bright white wound on the tree is highly visible from a distance, and that visible white mark was literally called a blaze.
Therefore, by stopping every few dozen yards and physically chopping these marks into the trees, the explorer was literally blazing a trail. They were forcefully altering this chaotic environment to create a legible, continuous route through the wilderness.
And this is where I get a little fired up, because I want to challenge how we use this phrase today. If you go on LinkedIn right now, you will see 1,000 people with the word trailblazer in their bio.
Absolutely. It's everywhere.
Right. It's like, I'm a trailblazer in synergistic marketing paradigms. I'm a trailblazer in B2B synergy. We throw this word around to describe anyone who just had a mildly original idea in a comfortable, air-conditioned boardroom. We've completely sanitized the violence and the exhaustion out of the metaphor.
You're totally right. We've diluted the concept. We've stripped it of its inherent friction.
Yes. True trailblazing isn't just about being creative. It is exhausting, physical, isolating labor. When a frontiersman blazed a trail, he was the one taking the thorn bushes to the face. He is the one twisting his ankle in the hidden rabbit holes. He absorbed all the environmental friction so that the people behind him could walk on a smooth, clear path. If you didn't leave a blaze, you died.
It's a huge burden.
It is. So to idiomatically blaze a trail today means to be the first person to do something incredibly difficult, to innovate a completely new method that allows others to safely follow.
And this raises a really important question about the modern mechanics of ambition, right? The pioneer's burden versus the follower's advantage. Because in business strategy, we often talk about the first mover advantage.
Oh, sure. Everyone wants to be first to market.
Right. But historically and idiomatically, blazing a trail is incredibly costly. The person blazing the trail absorbs massive amounts of risk, spends immense capital, whether that's literal money or metabolic energy, and makes all the painful mistakes. The followers, the second or third movers, they get the massive benefit of just following the bright white marks on the trees. They move faster, with less risk, because the trail has already been cut.
Think about Marie Curie. She didn't just casually have a good idea in the lab. She physically and intellectually suffered.
Oh, immense.
She endured massive institutional sexism. She worked with highly dangerous radioactive materials without proper shielding because, the science was totally unknown. And it eventually cost her her life. She absorbed the ultimate risk to blaze a trail for generations of women in the scientific community and for the entire field of physics itself. That is a trailblazer. You absorb the damage so others don't have to.
And as our hero continues on this newly blazed path, expending all this energy to impose logical order on a chaotic world, something deeply psychological begins to happen.
Things start getting weird.
Exactly. The environment starts to warp the traveler's mind. The journey stops being purely about physical survival and straightforward progress. It becomes strange. It becomes intensely absorbing. The traveler is presented with a choice: stay on the grueling logical path they are cutting, or surrender to an overwhelming distraction.
Which brings us to a phase of the journey we can call the descent. We are moving from the physical wilderness into the wilderness of the mind. And the ultimate metaphor for this cognitive surrender is going down the rabbit hole.
Such a classic.
It is easily one of the most potent literary metaphors we possess, coming straight from Lewis Carroll's 1865 masterpiece, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland.
And most people know the pop culture premise of Alice in Wonderland, but to really extract the psychological insight here, we need to look at the context of the story. Alice is a young girl living in Victorian England, and that was a society completely obsessed with rigid rules, strict logic, proper manners, and predictable order.
Right, everything had its proper place.
Exactly. So she is sitting outside, arguably bored to tears by this hyper-structured, logical reality. Suddenly, her reality is shattered by an anomaly. She sees a white rabbit. But it's not just a rabbit. It's wearing a waistcoat, carrying a pocket watch, and muttering in English about being late.
It is a complete glitch in the matrix. I mean, it defies every law of physics and biology she has ever been taught. And instead of running away in fear, she is instantly obsessively captivated.
She just has to know.
Right. She abandons the safe, logical world above ground, chases this anomaly, and falls down a seemingly bottomless rabbit hole. And when she finally lands, she has crossed a threshold into Wonderland. It's a completely illogical, surreal, and entirely nonsensical domain. Gravity is optional. Animals talk in riddles. A bite of a mushroom makes you shrink or grow like a giant. It is total, overwhelming immersion in the bizarre.
In our modern lexicon, to go down the rabbit hole means to enter into a deeply complex, bizarre, or endlessly fascinating subject or situation. And the defining characteristic is the psychological aftermath. You become completely absorbed, distracted, and consumed by it. You lose all sense of time, priority, and perspective, exactly like Alice falling through the dark.
We've all experienced this on a micro level. You sit down at your laptop, fully intending to do like 5 minutes of research for a work presentation. You click on one article about ancient Roman aqueducts. There's a hyperlink in there about a specific type of volcanic ash they used in the concrete. You click that.
We've all been there.
2 hours later, you are watching a 45-minute documentary on the dietary habits of gladiators, and you have completely forgotten about your presentation. You went down the Wikipedia rabbit hole. But here's the question I want to throw at you, because this fascinates me. We just spent all this energy talking about blazing a trail, which is all about focus and survival.
Right.
Why is the human brain so easily seduced by the illogical distraction of the rabbit hole? Why do we eagerly abandon our main quest for a white rabbit?
That is a brilliant question, and it points directly to how our brains evolved to forage for information. In neuroscience, there is a concept regarding how animals, including humans, seek resources. It's the balance between exploitative foraging and exploratory foraging.
Okay, exploitative versus exploratory.
Exactly. When you are blazing a trail, you are in an exploitative mindset. You are highly focused, expending massive energy to get a specific result. It's cognitively exhausting. But the rabbit hole triggers our exploratory circuitry. It offers an endless, effortless stream of novelty.
So it's basically an energy calculation.
Exactly. Every new hyperlink, every bizarre new fact provides a tiny hit of dopamine. And dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about the anticipation of reward. The brain is seduced by the mystery because it feels like discovery and progress, but without the physical danger or the heavy cognitive lifting of the actual wilderness.
So like a shortcut.
Right. The bizarre, illogical nature of the rabbit hole actually bypasses our critical thinking filters. We stop analyzing and we just surrender to the neurochemical drip of fascination. It is a profound cognitive trap.
So our brain is basically tricking us into thinking we're doing productive work because we are acquiring novel information, when in reality we're just falling further and further away from our actual goal.
Precisely. And when that rabbit hole stops being a fun, dopamine-fueled distraction and starts getting dark-like, when the journey gets intensely difficult or the project starts failing, a very different, much older evolutionary instinct kicks in. The amygdala fires up, and human instinct screams, run, go back to the familiar, go back to the logical world above ground.
And a true pioneer, someone who wants to achieve something monumental, knows that they absolutely cannot trust that instinct to retreat. Because if you have an escape route, you will eventually take it when the pain gets high enough.
It's just human nature.
Right. So to prevent themselves from fleeing, they have to manipulate their own environment to make retreat physically impossible. Which brings us to the second, much more intense concept in this phase of the descent: burning your boats.
This is where the journey requires a terrifying level of self-awareness. Sometimes you will hear this phrased as burning your bridges, but the origin story for burning your boats is vastly more dramatic and instructive. It takes us right back to our opening hook. The Spanish commander, Hernán Cortés, in the year 1519.
Right. Let's really dig into the historical reality of this, because it wasn't just some motivational seminar tactic. Cortés has landed on the shores of Mexico with a few hundred yen. But here's the context a lot of people miss. Cortés wasn't just fighting the indigenous empires. He was technically committing treason.
Right, his own government was after him.
The Spanish governor of Cuba had explicitly revoked Cortés's charter for the expedition at the last minute. Cortés just stole the ships and sailed anyway. So half of his men were loyal to the governor of Cuba, and they wanted to mutiny, take the ships, sail back, and have Cortés arrested.
That political context is everything. Cortés wasn't just managing the fear of an unknown continent. He was managing internal treason. He looked at his men and understood the fundamental psychology of retreat. As long as those ships were sitting in the harbor, just bobbing in the water, they represented a safety net.
A way out.
They represented an alternative to the brutal reality of moving forward into the jungle. And when a human being is facing extreme adversity, an alternative to suffering is impossibly seductive.
So Cortez makes a violently decisive move. To ensure his men couldn't mutiny and to ensure they had absolutely no choice but to march inland and conquer, he gave the order to destroy the fleet. Now, historians will point out that technically he likely ordered the ships to be scuttled, meaning drilling holes in the hulls and sinking them rather than dramatically setting them on fire.
Right. The reality is sometimes a bit less cinematic.
True, but the cultural memory and the idiom we inherited is the blazing inferno of burning your boats.
And regardless of the methodology, whether it was fire or water, the psychological mechanism is identical. He eliminated the means of return. Idiomatically today, to burn your boats means to take a massive, extreme, and irreversible action that completely severs any possibility of returning to your previous situation. You intentionally destroy your own backup plan. Failure is no longer an option, simply because there's nowhere to retreat to.
The modern applications of this are everywhere, even without literal fire. Imagine an executive who is just tired of corporate life. Instead of quietly building a startup on the weekends, they write a scorching public op-ed criticizing their industry and their current boss, post it on social media, and then quit.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
They have burned the boats. No one in that industry will hire them back. Or someone taking their absolute entire life savings, every penny of their 401k, and pouring it into a new business venture. They have severed the cord to safety. But I want to push back on this because I think a lot of people listen to the spend your life savings example and think, well, that's not heroic. That's just incredibly reckless and stupid.
It certainly sounds like it.
Right. If you talk to any financial advisor, the first thing they teach you is risk management. Diversify your portfolio. Keep a 6-month emergency fund. How do we reconcile the romance of burning the boats with basic responsible risk management?
That is the exact friction at the heart of this metaphor. And you have to distinguish between two different goals. Are you focused on wealth preservation, or are you aiming for a massive paradigm-shifting breakthrough?
Okay, preservation versus breakthrough.
Right. A financial advisor is teaching you preservation and incremental growth. But burning your boats is a strategy for when incremental growth isn't enough. It leverages a psychological concept known as the commitment device.
A commitment device.
Yeah.
Like Odysseus tying himself to the mast so he doesn't steer his ship into the rocks when he hears the siren?
Exactly like that. When human beings have a fallback plan, a plan B, we unconsciously allocate a significant percentage of our mental and emotional bandwidth to maintaining that fallback plan. We hedge our bets. Our prefrontal cortex is constantly running these background calculations like, is this too hard? Should I pull the ripcord? How much money do I have left?
Always looking for the exit.
Always. But when you burn the boats, you trigger a profound neurobiological shift. The brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, realizes that the only way to survive the immediate existential threat is to move forward. All the cognitive resources that were previously wasted on contemplating retreat are instantly and aggressively redirected towards solving the immediate problem in front of you.
Wow.
It induces a state of hyperfocus, resilience, and asymmetrical effort that is almost biologically impossible to access when you are comfortable.
It's forced evolution. It's the ultimate do-or-die mindset. You literally have to succeed or you are financially, professionally, or socially destroyed. And because you burn the boats, because you are trapped on this new shore with no way back, the universe or the market or your environment is going to test you.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to see if that forced commitment is actually backed up by genuine strength or if it was just pure arrogance. And that brings us to the next phase of our journey, the crucible.
This is the phase where the journey relentlessly tests the traveler's worthiness, and it does so in two very distinct sequential ways. First, through obvious, brutal, overpowering forces, and then later through hidden, precise psychological threats. The first of these tests is the obvious brutality, known as a trial by fire.
A trial by fire. The historical origin of this idiom is visceral and honestly a bit horrifying. It originates from a brutal medieval justice system that was literally called the ordeal of fire, or in Latin, judicium Dei, the judgment of God.
Dark Ages stuff.
Very much so. We are talking hundreds of years ago, long before forensics or modern courtrooms. Let's say someone was accused of a serious crime like theft, heresy, whatever, in a medieval village. The community needed a way to resolve the tension. So the court or the local priest would force the accused to undergo a catastrophic physical ordeal to determine their guilt or innocence.
And the mechanics of this ordeal were incredibly severe. The accused would be forced to hold a heavy, glowing piece of red-hot iron in their bare hands and walk a certain distance. Or they would be forced to walk barefoot across a literal bed of blazing, glowing coals.
And the underlying logic here, which obviously defies all modern science, was based entirely on blind faith. The belief was that if the person was truly innocent, divine intervention would step in and miraculously protect their flesh from the flames. The priest would bandage the burns, and if they healed cleanly after a few days, the person was declared innocent.
Which is just crazy to think about.
Right. But if they festered, they were guilty. So if you survived the fire without catastrophic injury, it proved your absolute worth to the entire community.
It is the most literal definition of a crucible. You are placed into extreme, blistering heat to see what your core material is truly made of. Today, thankfully, we have abandoned red-hot iron in our legal systems. But idiomatically, a trial by fire refers to any severely difficult, high-pressure test of a person's abilities, character, or endurance. And crucially, this almost always happens right at the very beginning of a new phase, a new job, or a new project before you've had any time to prepare.
Like, imagine graduating from college and trying to start your career in the finance sector in the middle of the 2008 global economic collapse. That is a trial by fire. You are instantly thrown into the worst possible economic conditions in a century, and you just have to figure out how to survive the inferno.
Sink or swim.
Exactly. Or imagine you are hired as a PR director for a major airline. And on your very first day in the office, before you even know where the bathrooms are, one of their planes is involved in a massive international scandal. You don't get a honeymoon period. You don't get a gentle onboarding seminar. You get flames.
What's fascinating here is how the visceral reality of this concept contrasts with our modern, highly sanitized corporate environments. In business, we use sterile terms like stress testing a system or implementing an intensive onboarding protocol.
Yes, I love that you brought that up, because the language of corporate HR is specifically designed to make us feel safe. A stress test in a modern office usually means running some software simulations or doing a tough Q&A in a boardroom with some executives. It's fundamentally safe. If you fail, you revise the PowerPoint.
It's exactly, no one gets actually burned.
Right. But a true trial by fire is not a simulation. There is real permanent damage happening. You might lose your job, you might lose your house, your reputation might be destroyed. I always think about this in terms of metallurgy. Think about forging steel.
Explain that connection. How does that fit in?
Well, if you want to make a blade strong, if you wanted to turn raw iron into a weapon, you can't just polish it. You have to plunge the raw metal into a blazing forge, heat it until it is glowing white hot, and then pull it out and violently strike it with a heavy hammer over and over again on an anvil. The fire and the immense pressure actually change the molecular structure of the metal.
Right, at a chemical level.
Yes, they force the carbon atoms into a tighter crystalline lattice. They forge it into something unbreakable. And a human trial by fire does the exact same thing to our psychology. The extreme fiery pressure burns away our naivete. It burns away our imposter syndrome. But it begs the question, why do some people become steel and some people just shatter and melt into a puddle? Does fire always make us stronger?
That is a phenomenal point, and it touches on the psychological concept of post-traumatic growth versus trauma. Fire doesn't miraculously make weak material strong. Fire reveals what the material already was.
Oh, that's profound.
If the baseline resilience is there, the acute stress of a trial by fire creates neuroplasticity. It forces the brain to rapidly adapt and build new, highly efficient neural pathways for handling crisis. This is a biological principle called hormesis, where a high dose of stress, if survived, fundamentally increases your baseline tolerance for future stress. If you survive it, you are fundamentally changed. You are stronger.
But the journey doesn't let you rest on your laurels. Once you prove you have that raw endurance, once you emerge from the forge as a hardened piece of steel, the nature of the universe's tests will violently change. Because brute force is no longer enough. The threats stop being obvious, blistering, and in your face. They stop being fiery.
They get sneaky.
Yes, they start hiding just out of sight. You move from the open forge into the silent field. You must learn to navigate a minefield.
And this represents a terrifying shift in the landscape of our epic journey. We are jumping forward in our historical timeline to 20th century warfare, so World War I, World War II, and beyond. I want you to picture a wide open field in the springtime. It looks beautiful. It's covered in tall, lush green grass swaying in the wind. There are wildflowers. It looks completely empty, peaceful, and inviting.
Sounds idyllic.
It does. But hidden just beneath the soil, maybe only an inch or two deep, are dozens of highly explosive, pressure-sensitive landmines.
The psychological terror of a minefield is entirely different from the terror of the fire. In a trial by fire, the danger is obvious. It is right in front of you. You can see the hot coals. You can feel the heat radiating. You know exactly what you're facing. But in a minefield, your eyes actively lie to you. The environment looks perfectly safe, but it is actually rigged for lethal destruction. The earth itself has become the enemy.
Exactly, and this requires a complete recalibration of the hero's strategy. If you take that blunt endurance, that thick skin you forged in the fire, and you apply it here, like if you just close your eyes, grit your teeth, and run blindly forward through that beautiful grassy field, you will be instantly destroyed. The rules of survival have fundamentally changed.
To survive a minefield, you cannot rush. Speed is literally death. You must walk agonizingly, excruciatingly slowly. You have to get down on your hands and knees and use a metal probe, slipping it into the dirt at a 30-degree angle, testing every single centimeter of the ground, feeling for the slightest unnatural resistance before you ever commit your physical weight to a footstep. It is exhausting, paranoid, sweat-inducing work.
When we pull this metaphor into modern civilian life, to navigate a minefield means to deal with a highly sensitive, deeply complex, and usually politically volatile situation. It's an environment where the threats aren't obvious, frontal attacks, but hidden traps, conflicting egos, and unwritten rules. One tiny misstep, one slightly inappropriate comment, or one misunderstood email CC could instantly detonate and ruin your career, sabotage a massive deal, or destroy a family relationship.
Let's talk about the absolute classic domestic minefield, discussing politics at the Thanksgiving dinner table with your extended family.
Oh boy, the ultimate test.
You know exactly what I'm talking about. Everyone is smiling, passing the gravy. It looks so peaceful. Then Uncle Bob clears his throat and mentions the upcoming election. Suddenly, you are in a minefield. You have to weigh every single syllable of your response. You are calculating grudges from 10 years ago.
Just sweating over the mashed potatoes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One wrong phrase, one slightly too aggressive tone, and suddenly the turkey is ruined, someone is crying, and half the family isn't speaking to the other half. Now, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, the point is that it is high-stakes emotional maneuvering.
And we see the exact same dynamic at the highest levels of global business. Imagine negotiating a merger between two fiercely rival tech corporations. The financial spreadsheets look good, but the room is a minefield of massive CEO egos, hidden golden parachute clauses, legacy loyalties, and cultural clashes.
It's exhausting just thinking about it. But this highlights a dramatic, necessary evolution in the skill set of whoever's taking this journey. To survive the initial trial by fire, you needed physical and mental armor. You needed to be tough. But to survive the minefield, being tough is totally useless if you step on a bomb. The required skill set shifts from brute force to agonizingly slow, calculated precision. It requires extreme emotional intelligence. You have to learn how to read the room, to understand the subtext of what people aren't saying, and how to exercise incredible patience. The hero has to evolve from a warrior swinging a broadsword into a surgeon wielding a microscopic scalpel.
That is a crucial evolution. Because if you cannot make that cognitive shift, if you treat the delicate politics of the minefield with the blunt force of a trial by fire, you fail. You detonate the situation. But let's say you do make the shift. Let's say you survive the blazing heat of the crucible and you tiptoe successfully through the explosive politics of the minefield. You finally make it. You reach the absolute top of the mountain. You have achieved incredible, unprecedented success. The journey is over, right? You won.
That is exactly what most people think. They pop the champagne. They're completely tragically wrong. Because surprisingly, historically, the absolute peak of the mountain is actually the most lethal part of the entire journey.
Wait, really? The top of the mountain is the most lethal?
Yes. You have successfully survived all the external threats the universe threw at you, but now you face a much more insidious enemy. You have to survive yourself. This introduces what I think is one of the most tragic, poetic, and beautiful metaphors in the entire English language: flying too close to the sun.
Oh, to understand the sheer tragedy of this concept, we have to
Yeah.
go all the way back to ancient Greek mythology, to the legendary story of Daedalus and his son Icarus.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So Daedalus was a master inventor, an unparalleled genius of ancient engineering and architecture. But because of political betrayal, he and his son Icarus were imprisoned in a high stone tower on an island by a cruel king named Minos. They were completely trapped, surrounded by the churning sea.
But Daedalus is a genius. He looks out the window and he realizes they can't swim away because of the tides, and they can't walk away. So they have to defy the laws of nature. They have to fly. He painstakingly gathers hundreds of fallen feathers from birds that roost in the tower, and he binds them together using melted beeswax and twine. He builds two magnificent functional sets of giant sweeping wings. It is a triumph of human ingenuity.
But before they strap the wings on and jump, Daedalus, acting as the wise elder, gives his young son a very specific, literal life or death warning based on the principle of the golden mean, the aurea mediocritas.
The golden mean, so basically finding the balance.
Exactly. He says, Icarus, you must fly at the exact middle altitude. If you fly too low, the dampness of the ocean waves will soak the feathers, making them too heavy, and you will plunge into the sea and drown. But more importantly, you must not fly too high. If you fly too close to the sun, the intense radiant heat will melt the beeswax holding the wings together, and you will fall.
It's the perfect advice for maintaining equilibrium in a volatile environment. So they stand on the edge of the tower and they jump. And a miracle happens. It works. They catch the thermals. They are flying. They have achieved the absolute impossible. But Icarus, he is young. He is experiencing this literal, intoxicating high. He is looking down at the world soaring above the clouds. He is so intoxicated by the sheer power, the speed, and the thrill of flight. The success goes straight violently to his head.
He loses all perspective.
Completely. He starts feeling invincible. He starts feeling like a god. He completely ignores his father's warning. He ignores the boundaries of his own equipment, and he starts soaring higher and higher, aggressively climbing into the sky, just chasing the sun.
And exactly as the engineer predicted, he flies too close to the sun. The solar heat softens and then melts the beeswax. The feathers detach and scatter violently into the wind. And in an instant, at the absolute apex of his triumph, his flight turns into a catastrophic freefall. He plummets from the sky and drowns in the sea below, which is later named the Icarian Sea in his memory.
It is a devastating story. We always blame Icarus for being foolish, though sometimes I wonder if Daedalus shouldn't bear some blame for giving a teenager military-grade aviation equipment.
That's a fair point.
But as an idiom in modern English, to fly too close to the sun means to fail, to lose your empire, or to be completely destroyed specifically because of your own extreme ambition, overconfidence, or greed. And the absolute most crucial element of this idiom is the timing. This destruction happens after a period of massive, undeniable success.
Precisely. You cannot fly too close to the sun if you never leave the ground. You have to have achieved something monumental first. The failure isn't a result of incompetence, it's a result of hubris. We see this constantly in the modern world. Think about a highly successful CEO who builds a revolutionary tech empire from scratch. They are hailed as a visionary, but the success warps their reality.
They start believing their own hype.
Exactly. They start feeling untouchable, so they start illegally manipulating stock prices or ignoring basic safety regulations because they think the laws no longer apply to them. They fly too close to the sun, the SEC investigates, and they lose their entire empire, ending up in federal prison.
Or think about pop culture. A universally loved celebrity who reaches the absolute pinnacle of fame, wins every award, but becomes so arrogant, so entitled, and so disconnected from reality that they exhibit horrible behavior, alienate all their peers, and completely destroy their own fan base. The industry didn't cancel them. They destroyed themselves. And this makes me want to pause and ask you a really profound psychological question. Is extreme success actually more dangerous than the initial trials we faced in the fire or the minefield?
If we look at the neuroscience and psychology of high achievers, I would argue that yes, extreme success is frequently much more lethal than adversity.
Wow, really?
Yes. When you are fighting your way through the uncharted wilderness, or bringing your boats, or walking through the minefield, fear is your constant companion. And fear is highly functional. Fear keeps you grounded. It makes you cautious, hyper-aware, and highly disciplined. Adversity forces you to respect the environment, but extreme success is neurochemically intoxicating. It triggers massive sustained releases of dopamine and testosterone, which creates a phenomenon known in biology as the winner effect.
The winner effect.
Yep.
What exactly does that do to the brain?
It actively erodes your perception of risk. It creates a powerful cognitive bias where you start to believe that the rules of gravity, both literal and metaphorical, no longer apply to your specific existence. The discipline, the paranoia, and the caution that actually got you to the top of the mountain are abandoned because you feel invincible. When you are in the fire, the threat is external. But when you are flying high, the threat is entirely internal because your own ego becomes the instrument of your destruction.
Wow. Your own ego becomes the instrument of your destruction. That is heavy. So how on earth does the hero avoid the fate of Icarus? How do you survive the winner effect? How do you survive the intoxication of success, maintain your altitude, and actually come home safely to finish the epic journey? To do that, the traveler must rely on something deeper than ambition. They must rely on their absolute core principles. They must find their true north.
This final idiom brings our entire journey beautifully full circle. It returns us to the imagery of nautical navigation where we started, but in a very different, much more mature context.
We started this journey looking at a terrifying blank map of uncharted waters, worrying about sea monsters. Now imagine you are a seasoned sailor, but you are caught in a terrifying, violent hurricane at sea. It is the middle of the night. The sky is pitch black. The clouds are so thick that you cannot see the sun, you cannot see the moon, and you cannot see a single constellation. You are completely, utterly blind. You have no external reference points to tell you which way your ship is facing. You are being violently thrown around by massive waves. It is total disorienting chaos.
Historically, before the invention and widespread use of the magnetic compass, this specific situation was almost always fatal. If you were out of sight of land and you lost the stars, you had absolutely no idea where you were going. You would just sail in circles until you starved or sank. But the discovery of the lodestone and the subsequent invention of the magnetic compass fundamentally changed human history and our relationship with the planet.
Because the magic of a magnetic compass is that it operates completely independent of the weather. No matter how dark the sky is, no matter how violently the ship is spinning in the waves, if you hold a compass flat in your hand, that tiny, magnetized metal needle will independently and instantly lock onto the Earth's magnetic magnetosphere. It points inexorably toward the magnetic North Pole. It points to true north.
Now, physicists will point out the technical difference between magnetic north and geographic true north. But idiomatically, the power of the concept remains identical. The compass provides an absolute, unwavering, objective point of direction. It doesn't care about the storm. It doesn't care about the darkness. It doesn't care about your fear. It just points north.
It's just a constant.
Right. And the fundamental foundational rule of all navigation is this. Once you know where north is, you instantly know where east, west, and south are. Once you know north, you know exactly where you are. You can reorient your entire existence in the midst of chaos.
So when we pull this out of the ocean and into human psychology, your true north represents your internal moral compass. It represents your absolute core values, your deepest unshakable beliefs, and your ultimate authentic life purpose. Therefore, to find your true north means to intentionally discover, or more often, to fiercely reconnect with those core values during times of intense chaos, deep confusion, or even during times of overwhelming, intoxicating success. It's what keeps you from turning into Icarus.
Imagine someone who has spent the last 5 years grinding away in a highly lucrative, prestigious corporate job on Wall Street that they absolutely soul-crushingly hate. They are making massive amounts of money, they are flying high, but they are miserable, burnt out, and their personal life is in chaotic shambles. So they make a radical decision. They take a year-long sabbatical, they disconnect from the money and the prestige, explicitly hoping to find their true north, to peel back the layers of societal expectation and figure out what actually matters to them beyond a massive paycheck.
Or think about someone who is feeling totally lost in their 20s, just bouncing from job to job. They decide to spend a few weekends volunteering at a pediatric hospital. And in the quiet, unglamorous moments of helping sick kids, they suddenly feel a profound sense of clarity. They realize an intense, burning desire to go to medical school and become a doctor. They found their true north. They found the singular orienting principle that gives their life absolute direction, regardless of the storms they will face to get there.
If we synthesize this entire epic journey we've been analyzing today, this final idiom is the skeleton key to the entire framework.
Right, it unlocks the whole thing.
Exactly. The epic adventure, the terrifying departure, the descent into obsession, the brutal trials of the crucible, the dizzying heights of success, it doesn't actually end by conquering the external world. You don't win the journey just by blazing a trail or surviving a minefield. The journey is only truly completed when you successfully orient the internal self. The external chaos, the fire, the monsters, the melting wax, is just a mechanism to force you to stop looking outward for validation and finally look down at your own internal compass.
I absolutely love that. The external chaos is just a mechanism to force you to look at your internal compass.
Okay, let's do a final rapid-fire conceptual recap of this incredible psychological narrative arc we just traveled together. We started by abandoning safety and leaving the map entirely, sailing straight into the terrifying, monster-filled blank spaces of uncharted waters. Once we hit the shore, we took up a heavy iron axe and did the exhausting, violent, physical work to blaze a trail through the dense, unknown forest, absorbing the risks so others could eventually follow.
Along that newly blazed path, our brains were seduced by novelty, and we surrendered to curiosity and obsession, falling deep down the rabbit hole into complex, illogical, and surreal new worlds.
When the terror of the unknown struck and our amygdala screamed at us to retreat to safety, we intentionally removed our own safety nets, choosing to burn our boats and physically force ourselves forward through the power of irreversible commitment.
Stripped of a backup plan, we faced the obvious, brutal, blistering test of raw endurance in a trial by fire, burning away our weakness and forging our character like steel.
Evolving our skills from brute force to emotional and intellectual precision, we then had to meticulously and agonizingly tiptoe our way through the hidden, sensitive, explosive dangers of navigating a minefield.
Having survived the earth and reached the absolute pinnacle of success, we faced the ultimate internal danger of arrogance and the winner effect, having to fiercely guard against our own expanding ego to avoid flying too close to the sun.
And finally, to survive the dizzying chaos of both profound adversity and extreme success, we looked inward, locking onto our core moral values to find our true north, orienting ourselves and bringing the hero safely home.
It is an incredibly cohesive, deeply psychological framework for understanding human ambition and resilience. And to you, our listener, the reason we took this massive deep dive today isn't just so you could use fancy historical vocabulary words to sound articulate in your next board meeting. The real reason is that these phrases are ancient, battle-tested psychological frameworks for surviving your own ambitious projects and your own massive life transitions. When you feel totally overwhelmed and out of your depth at a new job, you aren't failing. You are just in a trial by fire. It is supposed to hurt while you forge the steel. When you feel lost and disconnected, you aren't broken. You just need to consult your true north. Language gives you the power to categorize the chaos, and once you can categorize the chaos, you can actually survive it.
And that profound concept, how the language we use literally shapes the reality we experience, leaves us with a fascinating philosophical question to ponder as we wrap up this journey. We've seen today that our English vocabulary for success, ambition, and progress is heavily, almost exclusively built on metaphors of ancient warfare, brutal physical survival, burning ships, chopping down trees, and navigating explosives. If linguistic relativity is real, if our language shapes how we think, does this violent vocabulary inherently force us to view our own career growth and personal development as a violent zero-sum struggle?
Oh, wow. That changes everything.
Think about it. What if we didn't use idioms of conquering, burning, and surviving minefields? How might our daily behavior, our toxic corporate cultures, and our massive personal stress levels change if instead we conceptualize success using the idioms of gardening? Planting, nurturing, pruning, seasonal growth. Or the idioms of architecture, designing, building, laying foundations, support. If we change the metaphor, do we change the actual nature of the journey?
That is a phenomenal thought to leave on. If we change the metaphor, do we fundamentally change the journey? I'm going to be thinking about that all week. Thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope that the next time you find yourself standing on that precipice, looking out into the total unknown, feeling that tightness in your chest, you remember the vocabulary of the pioneer. Step forward into the void. Keep your eyes open for the sea monsters. Don't forget your compass and always follow your true north. Until next time.
So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Today, we were getting into something that, I think it affects literally every single person listening to this.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone deals with this, whether they realize it or not.
Right. Because today we're looking at some notes from this really advanced English masterclass series.
Yeah.
And it charts this ultimate human journey.
Yeah. And we're moving way past the whole the underdog phase where you pull off some impossible victory.
Right, and past the pioneer phase too, right, where you're just exploring the unknown.
Exactly. The mission for today's deep dive is exploring what comes next. that inevitable phase where, well, success breeds competition.
Yeah, you turn around and suddenly you're face to face with your nemesis.
It's the life cycle of the ultimate rivalry. And the sources we have give us these heavy-hitting, honestly breathtaking metaphors that native speakers use to describe the sheer intensity of human conflict.
And for you listening, I mean, why does this matter to you? Well, because we all navigate conflict.
Right, every day.
Yeah, it could be a fierce corporate takeover you're reading about, or, a dramatic political debate, or just a really tense personal disagreement with a friend.
And understanding this exact vocabulary and the historical context behind it, it's going to help you sound highly articulate and just fiercely intelligent in those competitive environments.
Completely. So let's just jump right into phase one, the very beginning of a conflict.
Yeah, the moment when two really powerful forces realize they cannot both have what they want. And you feel those tensions start to rise.
Okay, picture this. It is the year 168 BC.
Oh, this is such a good story.
It's amazing. Picture the intense, suffocating heat of the Mediterranean sun just beating down on the dust outside the city of Alexandria.
Right.
You've got this invading king, Antiochus IV of the Seleucid Empire, and he is standing at the city gates with this massive, battle-hardened army behind him.
Like thousands of soldiers.
Exactly. He is moments away from conquering a vital ally of the Roman Republic. And walking toward him, just right through the dust, entirely alone, is an unarmed Roman diplomat.
A guy named Popilius Leonus.
Right. Entirely alone. Which is just, wild.
It's honestly one of the most cinematic moments in ancient history. And it perfectly sets the stage for the architecture of human conflict.
Because he's not there to negotiate, is he?
No, not at all. Popilius doesn't bring like a counteroffer or a chest of gold or anything. He walks right up to this conquering king, surrounded by armed guards, and just hands him a decree from the Roman Senate.
And the message is incredibly blunt.
Very blunt. It basically says, cease your attack immediately, turn your army around, or you will be at war with Rome.
And Antiochus, being this experienced politician, he does exactly what politicians have done for millennia when they get backed into a corner.
He deflects.
Yes, he smiles, he tries to buy some time. He tells Popilius that he needs to consult with his council.
Right, he needs a few days to think about it.
Yeah. He is desperately trying to keep the gray area alive, searching for some diplomatic loophole that lets him take the city without actually triggering a war with a superpower.
And that gray area, that's the comfort zone of all negotiations, where you avoid making the hard choices. But Popilius, he just refuses to play the game.
No time for games.
Right. He doesn't argue with the king. He doesn't yell or threaten him further. He simply takes this wooden walking stick he's holding, bends down, and literally carves a deep circle in the sand.
Entirely around the king's feet.
Yes, right around him.
I always try to imagine the absolute silence that must have fallen over that army in that exact second.
Oh, you could probably hear a pin drop.
Right. Because you just don't do that to a king. You don't put a monarch in a literal timeout.
You certainly don't. But then Popilius looks Antiochus right in the eye, and he delivers a condition that just permanently alters their interaction. He says, before you step outside of this circle, you must give me your answer piece, or war.
Wow. And right there, we have the birth of the ultimatum, the phrase, to draw a line in the sand.
Meaning to establish a strict, non-negotiable boundary.
Exactly. No further compromises will be accepted.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what I want to push back on, or at least explore here, is the sheer aggression of that tactic.
It is very aggressive.
Right.
Yeah.
Because in modern conflict resolution, whether it's corporate mediation or couples therapy, we're constantly told to look for the win-win scenario.
Right. Keep the dialogue open.
Yeah, we're taught to build golden bridges for our opponents to retreat across. So doesn't forcing a binary artificial timeline practically guarantee a violent outcome?
It definitely feels like that.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like you're backing a wild animal into a corner just to see if it bites.
Well, what's fascinating here is that it absolutely accelerates the timeline, yeah? But from a strategic standpoint, that acceleration is the entire objective.
How so?
Think about the psychology of the delay tactic that King Antiochus was using. Delay heavily favors the aggressor.
Ah, right.
Every single day that passes, his army eats more of the local resources, his engineers build better siege engines, and the defending city just grows weaker and more panicked. So the gray area was actually a trap.
Exactly. Popilius recognized that the illusion of negotiation was a weapon being used against Rome. So by drawing that physical circle, He deliberately removed the oxygen from the delay tactic.
That is so smart.
The psychology of forcing an immediate, absolute decision. It's all about stripping away deception. It forces your opponent to reveal their true intentions in real time under immense pressure.
It says that the future you're trying to manipulate is happening right now in this circle.
Right. The line in the sand demands reality over rhetoric.
That makes a lot of sense when you bring it into a modern context, like the source material points out. Think about a workers' union that has been negotiating with factory management for like 6 months.
Oh yeah, classic example.
Management keeps saying, oh, we're looking at the budget, we're running projections, we just need a little more time.
Always needing more time.
Right. And the union realizes the delay is just a strategy to wear them down. So they draw a line in the sand, they issue a formal declaration. If wages are not increased by 5 p.m. on Friday, a total strike begins.
And notice how the mechanics of that union thread perfectly mirror the Roman circle.
Totally.
The union is no longer negotiating the nuances of healthcare benefits or, overtime pay. They have collapsed this massively complex negotiation into a simple binary choice. Agree to the terms, which is peace, or face the strike, which is war.
But doing that requires an almost terrifying level of internal confidence.
Oh, for sure.
Because a boundary is absolutely meaningless if it's just a bluff.
Yeah.
Imagine if Popilius drew that circle in the dirt and King Antiochus just laughed, stepped right over the line and said, yeah, I'm going to take the city anyway.
Right. If Popilius had just shrugged and said, well, let's schedule another meeting.
The power of the entire Roman Republic would have evaporated in an instant.
Which is the fundamental vulnerability of any ultimatum. A line in the sand is only as formidable as the consequences behind it.
You have to be ready to back it up.
Exactly. The moment you draw it, you are committing your own future as much as you're threatening theirs. Psychologically, you have to be entirely prepared to execute the punishment. Because if you allow someone to cross your boundary without enacting that promised consequence, you haven't just failed a negotiation. You've actually trained your opponent to realize your words are completely disconnected from your actions.
You've basically given them permission to ignore you forever.
Yes.
So that leaves us with the critical pivot point.
Yeah.
The boundary is drawn. The Friday deadline arrives, or the king takes a step forward. The line fails.
Diplomacy is officially dead.
Right. And the friction transitions from a theoretical threat into an actual kinetic collision.
Phase 2, the initial clash of two forces that just refuse to yield.
And to describe the sheer, unadulterated stubbornness of this phase, we actually move away from Roman history and look directly at the wild animal kingdom.
Yeah, we're talking about the visceral reality of the phrase, locking horns.
Which is just a phenomenal biological metaphor.
It really is. To grasp the mechanics of what happens when human beings lock horns, you have to visualize the raw, physical reality of massive male animals, like bighorn sheep, stags, or massive bulls.
Fighting for absolute dominance over a territory.
Or a mate, yeah.
We're talking about hundreds of pounds of pure muscle, driven by this evolutionary imperative that basically tells them, win this fight or your genetic lineage ends today.
The stakes are absolute. But look closely at the mechanism of the combat itself.
Okay.
When these animals fight for dominance, they don't circle each other taking calculating, strategic swipes from a safe distance. Evolution didn't design them for fencing.
Definitely not.
It designed them for blunt force trauma. They back up to gain momentum, they lower their heads, they accelerate to top speed, and they violently hurl their massive skulls at each other.
The impact must be staggering. I mean, the sources mention that the sound of two bighorn sheep colliding out in the mountains can echo for a mile.
It literally sounds like a rifle shot.
That's insane.
It's a massive transfer of kinetic energy. The skull and spine of these animals have evolved specifically to absorb forces that would instantly kill almost any other mammal.
Right.
But the idiom, locking horns, it doesn't actually come from the crash itself. It comes from the immediate aftermath.
Oh, because they don't just bounce off each other and reset.
Exactly. Their horns physically tangle, the curvature of the antlers interlocks, they become this single trapped entity, pressing forward with all the strength in their hind legs, just desperately trying to force the other to the ground.
I loved translating that biological image into our daily lives because it perfectly captures a very specific type of dysfunction.
How so?
Well, it reminds me of two cars facing each other on a single lane bridge. Both drivers are just incredibly stubborn, so they just lock their bumpers together, and then they both slam their feet on the gas pedals.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. You have engines screaming, smoke pouring off the tires, transmission fluid boiling, but neither car is moving a single inch. They are completely paralyzed by their own aggression.
And that is the defining characteristic of locking horns in a professional or personal rivalry.
Right.
All forward momentum entirely ceases. The conflict becomes intimately static.
Intimately static. I like that.
Think about the psychology required to sustain that state. When you lock horns with a colleague, you're no longer trying to solve a problem. You're no longer trying to discover the most efficient path forward. You are entirely consumed with the mechanics of simply not being pushed backward.
Yeah, the sources talk about how it happens in corporate boardrooms every single day. Imagine a CEO and a head of marketing who have fundamentally irreconcilable visions for a company's survival.
Classic clash.
The CEO believes the only path forward is ruthless cost-cutting, firing staff, and milking the legacy product. But the head of marketing is convinced that approach will just lead to a slow death.
Right, so they demand massive spending to rebrand and capture a younger demographic.
Exactly, and neither will budge. So every single meeting turns into a battlefield where they just hurl their arguments at each other.
And when they do that, observe how they use information. When two executives have locked horns, data is no longer used for illumination or discovery.
It's used as a weapon.
It's used as a battering ram, yeah. The CEO throws a spreadsheet across the table to prove a point, and the marketing director throws a focus group study back to parry the blow.
Right.
The intimacy of the conflict blinds them to the larger environment. They are so focused on the pressure against their own forehead that they don't even notice the company itself is bleeding talent and losing market share.
Which begs the question, why is this our default? Because whether you're a mountain goat or a Fortune 500 executive, this strategy seems incredibly dangerous.
It is.
For the animals, one slight slip on the rocks and a neck snaps. For the executives, they could easily tank the morale of the entire company, getting them both fired. Why do we biologically and psychologically commit to a strategy of intimate, stubborn destruction?
Well, because yielding feels like existential death.
Wow. Existential death.
Yeah. At a certain point in a rivalry, the argument ceases to be about the specific policy or the specific territory, and it becomes entirely about the validity of your core identity.
It gets personal.
Exactly. The biological imperative of the ram is to prove it's the strongest specimen on the mountain. The psychological imperative of the executive is to prove that their interpretation of reality is the only correct one.
So if the CEO backs down, they aren't just changing a budget.
No. They're admitting that their fundamental understanding of business is flawed.
It's the ultimate defense mechanism of a fragile ego. If I yield to you, I am erasing myself.
Precisely. But the bumper-to-bumper car analogy you brought up highlights the fatal flaw in this phase of conflict. You can only keep the gas pedal pinned to the floor for so long before the engine block melts.
Right, the energy just runs out.
The explosive anaerobic energy required to sustain that initial violent crash, it just cannot last indefinitely. If both sides are relatively matched in strength and stubbornness, the nature of the fight has to mutate.
The sprint fails, the tires blow out, the muscles flood with lactic acid and cramp. And this is the moment the rivalry descends into something far more insidious.
Phase 3.
Yeah, we move out of the boardroom, out of the wild, and into the mud. We enter a war of attrition.
It is a chilling phrase, and honestly, an even more chilling reality.
So what does it actually mean?
A war of attrition describes a prolonged, agonizing struggle where the concept of winning is completely detached from skill or brilliance.
Okay.
The winner is simply the entity that is still breathing when the other side finally collapses from absolute exhaustion.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because to fully wrap our minds around how devastating this shift is, we have to look at the historical crucible where this concept was perfected, which is the trench warfare of World War I.
Yes.
Because prior to this, military strategy was largely based on the illusion of the decisive, brilliant maneuver. You had generals studying Napoleon, dreaming of outflanking the enemy, charging the cavalry, capturing the capital city, and, being home in time for the harvest.
Classical warfare was essentially a violent game of chess. The objective was to outmaneuver the opponent's pieces and achieve a checkmate through spatial dominance. Right. But the Industrial Revolution completely broke the chessboard. By the time World War I began, technology had vastly outpaced tactical doctrine. You suddenly had mass-produced machine guns, heavy mechanized artillery, and barbed wire.
But what that meant on the ground was that Human beings simply could not survive standing up. The open field became a meat grinder, so both sides did the only logical thing: they dug into the earth.
They dug hundreds of miles of deep, muddy, rat-infested trenches stretching across the entirety of Europe.
And the moment those trenches were fortified, the entire philosophy of human conflict was forcibly rewritten.
Because the goal of capturing territory became an impossibility.
Right. The geography wasn't changing.
An army command might order a massive offensive, sacrificing tens of thousands of young men's lives just to move the front line a mere 500 yards. And then 3 days later, a counterattack would push them right back to where they started.
It's just horrific.
The map wasn't changing, but the casualty lists were just astronomical.
And that is the terrifying psychological pivot. If you are a general in that war, and you realize you absolutely cannot win by outsmarting the enemy, and you cannot win by capturing their territory, how do you define victory?
You have to invent a completely new, horrific metric for success.
Which is what?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the metric shifts entirely from spatial dominance to resource depletion.
Okay.
The strategy becomes mathematical, cold, and entirely focused on suffering. The command structure adopts the mindset of, well, we cannot break through their defenses. But if we continually bombard their trenches with artillery day and night for 3 consecutive years, eventually a breaking point will be reached.
They'll just run out of things.
Yes, they will run out of steel for their cannons, they will run out of grain to bake bread, they will run out of a generation of young men to conscript, and ultimately, their civilian population will lose the psychological willpower to sustain the war.
So you don't defeat the enemy with a knockout punch. You slowly, methodically bleed them dry until their society collapses under the weight of the effort. It strips all the perceived glory out of the conflict. It's no longer about who's the bravest or the smartest. It's exclusively about who can absorb the most agonizing pain for the longest continuous period.
And that is the exact anatomy of a war of attrition in any arena.
Yeah.
It is just a contest of pure endurance.
Which you see play out in the modern legal and corporate world all the time, often with staggering financial consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources give this great example of 2 tech billionaires who have a patent dispute. They're both incredibly wealthy, they both have massive egos, and they just refuse to back down. So they unleash armies of high-powered $1,000 an hour lawyers on each other.
Standard operating procedure for them.
Right. They file endless injunctions, massive discovery requests, millions of pages of documents that have to be reviewed line by line.
And very quickly, the original patent they were arguing over becomes completely irrelevant.
Totally forgot.
The legal mechanism itself becomes the weapon of attrition. The entire objective is to make the daily process of fighting so astronomically expensive, so legally perilous, and so deeply personally miserable that one of the billionaires finally wakes up one morning and says, I concede. I simply cannot bleed any more capital into this black hole.
It happens in labor disputes, too.
Yeah.
A factory strike that drags on for 9 months is a classic war of attrition.
Definitely.
The union workers are draining their life savings, taking out second mortgages, trying to feed their kids without a paycheck. Meanwhile, the factory management is watching their quarterly profits vanish, their supply chains rot, and their market share get devoured by competitors.
And nobody is negotiating.
Nope. They're just sitting in their respective trenches, watching the clock, waiting for the other side's pain threshold to shatter first.
When you step back and look at the architecture of a war of attrition, it represents a massive, tragic inefficiency in human behavior. The sheer volume of resources, capital, time, emotional bandwidth, innovation that is incinerated just to maintain the stalemate is staggering.
So why don't we stop? I mean, if you're a CEO burning through millions in a lawsuit, or a union leader watching families go bankrupt, why not just draw a new line in the sand and negotiate?
Because you become trapped by the sunk cost fallacy.
Ah, right, the sunk costs.
Once you've invested a year of suffering into a trench, abandoning that trench feels like a betrayal of the suffering itself. If you back down now, all the money you spent, all the stress you endured, it all becomes meaningless.
You can't let it be for nothing.
Right. You convince yourself that the enemy must be hurting just as much as you are, and that they're only one day away from surrendering. So you hold on for one more day, and then another, and the attrition just deepens.
You become anchored to the pain, but while you are in that metaphorical trench, pouring every ounce of your energy into this endless grind, something profound happens to your perception of your enemy.
Yeah, this is a huge turning point.
Up until this point, our hero might have thought they were fundamentally superior, you know? the smartest executive in the industry, the most talented creator. But as the war of attrition drags on, they look across the battlefield through the smoke and the mud, and a terrifying realization washes over them.
They realize their opponent hasn't flinched.
Not even a little.
The enemy is absorbing everything being thrown at them and throwing it right back with equal force.
Exactly, and that shatters the illusion of superiority. This brings us to phase 4. This is the moment the conflict holds up a mirror, forcing you to look at your own limitations. You realize you have met your match.
Meeting your match is a really profound psychological threshold. It describes the precise moment you encounter an opponent, a rival, or even just a complex problem that is exactly equal to or perhaps slightly superior to your own carefully honed abilities.
It's a terrifying feeling.
It forces you to drain every single reserve of talent you possess merely to survive the interaction.
To really feel the weight of this, we need to lean into the historical origins of the phrase, which trace back to medieval combat and tournament sports.
Right. Picture a champion knight or a master swordsman.
Okay.
This is an individual who has dedicated their entire life to the pursuit of martial perfection. They've traveled from city to city, tournament to tournament, facing hundreds of challengers. And for years, they have easily, almost effortlessly, defeated every single person who stepped into the ring with them.
The psychology of a long, unbroken streak of effortless victories, it's fascinating.
It really is.
Because when the world constantly provides you with evidence of your superiority, you begin to internalize it as a fundamental law of physics.
You start believing your own hype.
Yeah, the champion stops thinking of their skill as something they practice and starts believing it's simply who they are. They develop this armor of invincibility. They expect to win before the fight even begins.
So imagine this champion stepping into the arena for what they assume is just another routine victory. A stranger steps out of the crowd. The champion goes through the motions. They launch their signature attack, swinging their heavy sword with that lethal practice speed that has crushed 100 lesser fighters. But the stranger doesn't stumble. The stranger doesn't fall.
They just take it.
The stranger perfectly, effortlessly blocks the strike. And not just blocks it, they anticipate the follow-up, parrying the next blow and countering with a speed and brilliance that exactly mirrors the champion's own.
Oh man, the neurological shock of that moment must be staggering.
Unbelievable shock. Up until that split second, the champion's nervous system has been entirely conditioned to expect the sword to find its mark.
Right.
The sudden jarring halt of their momentum against an immovable object, it forces an immediate and violent cognitive dissonance. The universe is suddenly refusing to behave the way they've been conditioned to expect.
The reality they built their entire identity upon has just collapsed.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate ego check. And for those of us who, don't spend our weekends in medieval armor, the modern equivalents from our sources are just as devastating.
Yeah, let's hear them.
It's like spending your whole life being the smartest person in the room, dominating every game of chess you play. And then one day, you sit down and play against a highly advanced chess supercomputer.
Oh, that's brutal.
You try your favorite opening, the one that always traps human players, and the computer just effortlessly shuts it down in 3 moves.
Wow.
You try a wild, chaotic, emotional sacrifice to throw it off balance. The computer coldly and mathematically calculates the perfect defense. You realize, with that sinking feeling in your stomach, that your absolute best is no longer sufficient.
It happens in highly specialized professions all the time, too.
Yeah.
Think of a brilliant, arrogant detective. They have a perfect closure rate. They can look at a crime scene and intuitively piece together the narrative in minutes. They are untouchable.
Until they aren't.
Right. Until a new criminal mastermind arrives in their jurisdiction. Someone who understands forensic countermeasures, who anticipates the detective's psychological profiling, and who operates on the exact same rarefied intellectual frequency.
That's straight out of a movie.
When the detective analyzes the first crime scene and finds absolutely nothing, the arrogance vanishes. They realize, perhaps with a mix of absolute horror and a very strange kind of thrill, that they are looking at their own reflection in a dark mirror.
Or a university star debater. They've crushed every local and regional competition using their standard playbook of rhetorical tricks. They're confident, they're loud, they just own the podium.
Yeah.
But they finally reach the national championship and they step up to the mic against an opponent who doesn't get rattled, who doesn't take the bait, and who dissects their core argument with surgical, terrifying precision.
The reason meeting your match is such a crucial phase in the anatomy of a rivalry is because it forces a mandatory evolution.
You have to adapt.
When your standard playbook fails and your natural talent is neutralized by an equal opposing force, you are plunged into an identity crisis. If you have always defined yourself as the smartest or the strongest, and you're suddenly looking at someone who is just as smart and just as strong, who are you? What is your actual value?
You can't rely on being special anymore. You have to rely on grit. You have to dig into reserves of creativity and endurance you didn't even know you possessed. It strips away all the illusions and forces you to rebuild yourself from the ground up while under heavy fire.
It is agonizing in the moment, but it's often the catalyst for the greatest period of personal or professional growth in a person's life.
So what does this all mean? Let's follow this timeline to its logical and perhaps incredibly tragic extreme. Phase 5. Let's say our hero goes through this crucible. They realize they've met their match in the middle of a brutal, soul-crushing war of attrition.
They're completely drained.
Right. They've mortgaged their house. They haven't slept a full night in a year. Their personal relationships are fraying, but they absolutely refuse to yield. They pour every remaining drop of their sanity, their wealth, and their time into defeating this equal rival. And let's say, against all odds, they strike the final blow. They actually win.
The rival's broken. The campaign succeeds.
The competitor declares bankruptcy. The judge slams the gavel in their favor. The crowd cheers. The battle is definitively over.
But then what?
Right. As the adrenaline fades and the dust settles, our hero turns around and looks at the wreckage of their own life. This brings us to the most devastating concept in our entire deep dive, the catastrophic success, a Pyrrhic victory.
A Pyrrhic victory, pronounced P-I-R, for anyone taking notes. This describes a victory that comes at such a monumental, devastating cost to the winner that it's fundamentally indistinguishable from a catastrophic defeat.
It's the hollowest form of success imaginable.
It really is. And to understand how a victory can simultaneously be a defeat, we have to travel back to ancient Greek history, specifically the year 279 BC, to look at the man who gave his name to this phenomenon.
King Pyrrhus of Epirus.
Yes. King Pyrrhus was widely considered one of the most brilliant military commanders of his era. He was frequently compared by his contemporaries to Alexander the Great.
Wow, that's high praise.
He was ambitious, highly tactical, and he decided to launch a massive military campaign against the emerging aggressive superpower of the Mediterranean, the Roman Republic.
Pyrrhus didn't just bring an army, did he? He brought a state-of-the-art military machine.
He crossed the sea with tens of thousands of highly disciplined infantry, elite cavalry, and most terrifyingly for the Romans, war elephants.
The Romans had never encountered elephants before. It was the ancient equivalent of rolling armored tanks onto a battlefield of men holding spears.
It was a massive technological and psychological advantage. And the historical record is very clear on the outcome of the engagement, specifically the Battle of Asculum.
King Pyrrhus won.
He won. His forces broke the Roman lines, he drove the Roman army from the battlefield, he achieved his tactical objective and held the ground.
But the Romans didn't just break and run. They were absolute masters of attrition. They fought with a vicious, relentless, grinding determination. They made Pyrrhus pay for every single inch of that battlefield with blood.
And that is where the math of the victory becomes horrifying. In the process of securing this technical win, King Pyrrhus's army was decimated.
It's just wiped out.
He lost thousands of his most elite veteran soldiers. But crucially, almost all of his closest friends, his most trusted advisors, and his most experienced generals were slaughtered in the mud. He lost the entire command infrastructure that allowed him to project power in the first place.
The story goes that after the battle, as the surviving soldiers were attempting to celebrate this supposedly great victory, King Pyrrhus walked out and looked over the carnage.
Yeah.
He looked at the bodies of his best friends and the ruin of his elite corps. And a soldier came up to congratulate him on defeating the Romans. Pyrrhus looked at him and delivered a line that just echoed through eternity. He said, "If we win one more battle like this against the Romans, we will be completely destroyed."
It is a moment of profound, tragic clarity. He realized that the victory had consumed the victor. He won the day, but in doing so, he completely eradicated his own ability to fight tomorrow.
Bringing this concept out of ancient warfare and into our daily lives is incredibly sobering because people pursue Pyrrhic victories constantly.
Oh, all the time.
Think about the dynamics of a toxic marriage. Two people get into a massive argument over something trivial, but it touches a nerve, and they lock horns.
Right.
One partner decides they're going to win this argument no matter what. They use every vulnerability they know about the other person. They are cruel, they are relentless, they bring up past traumas, and they systematically dismantle their partner's arguments until the partner breaks down in tears and admits, fine, you are right, you win.
They secured the victory. They proved they were intellectually superior in that specific debate. But the cost of that victory was the permanent destruction of trust and emotional safety in the relationship. They won the argument, but they ensured the death of the marriage.
It happens in the corporate world all the time, too. Imagine a ruthless executive who wants absolute, unchallenged control of a company they co-founded with a longtime partner.
Oh, a hostile takeover.
Exactly. They launch a hostile takeover. They leak damaging stories to the press. They manipulate the board of directors. They spend millions on corporate lawyers, and they force their partner out.
They get the big corner office.
They win the board vote, yeah. But the ensuing scandal, the sheer toxicity of the fight, and the sudden loss of the partner's crucial expertise causes the stock price to plummet by 80%. Yeah. Key clients leave in disgust.
This raises an important question, right? The executive is now the absolute, undisputed ruler of an empire of ash.
Yeah.
They gain total control over an entity that they fundamentally destroyed in the process of acquiring it.
Or think about the neighbor who gets into a bitter dispute over a property line. It's over a strip of grass 2 feet wide, but they refuse to lose. They spend their entire life savings, hundreds of thousands of dollars, on land surveyors and endless civil litigation.
Just for some grass.
5 years later, a judge finally rules in their favor. They get their 2 feet of grass, but their bank account is empty. The stress has caused them to have a heart attack, and their children won't speak to them because they were entirely consumed by the vendetta for half a decade.
These scenarios force us to fundamentally interrogate the concept of success.
Yeah.
We're deeply conditioned by our culture to believe that winning is the ultimate good, that victory is a self-justifying state.
But a Pyrrhic victory exposes the illusion of outcome-based thinking. It teaches us that the outcome of a conflict is entirely meaningless if you don't calculate the price of admission.
That's a great way to put it.
It's a terrifying realization because if the cost of defeating your nemesis is your own financial, emotional, or moral bankruptcy, then they didn't really lose. They just dragged you into the abyss with them.
Which is the profound dilemma at the heart of the hero's journey when dealing with a nemesis. If drawing a line in the sand leads to locking horns, and locking horns descends into a war of attrition, and fighting that war against an equal match almost mathematically guarantees a Pyrrhic victory. What is the alternative? How does a mature, highly intelligent individual actually end a rivalry before it consumes them?
How do you stop the machine once it's in motion? That brings us to phase 6. The final and arguably the most difficult phase of conflict resolution. We're moving away from the mechanics of destruction and looking at the anatomy of peace.
And to do that, we explore one of the most evocative, labor-intensive metaphors in the English language.
Burying the hatchet.
To bury the hatchet. In modern parlance, this means to completely forgive someone, to consciously and permanently end a long-standing, bitter dispute, and to genuinely make peace with an old enemy so that both parties can survive and move forward.
The origins of this phrase are deeply profound. They don't come from European warfare or Roman diplomacy. They come from the rich political history of Native American cultures.
Specifically, the traditions surrounding the formation of the Iroquois Confederacy centuries ago.
Right.
To really understand the weight of this metaphor, you have to understand the geopolitical reality of that region before the Confederacy was formed. You had several powerful, distinct tribes locked in endless, multi-generational cycles of blood feuds and revenge warfare.
It was the ultimate, inescapable war of attrition.
Exactly. Every act of violence demanded retribution, which sparked another act of violence. Right. Entire communities were being decimated. It was a slow, collective march toward mutual annihilation.
But eventually, visionary leadership emerged. Individuals who looked at the endless cycle of Pyrrhic victories and realized that if they didn't change the paradigm, there would be no one left to inherit the land.
Right.
So these warring tribes came together to negotiate a monumental treaty, establishing what became known as the Great Law of Peace. And to seal this unprecedented alliance, they didn't just sign a document.
No. They engaged in a deeply physical, communal ritual of disarmament.
The physical labor of it is what gets me.
The tribal leaders would gather together in a public space. They would literally take their physical weapons of war, their war clubs, their tomahawks, their hatchets. They would find a great white pine tree and uproot it, or they would dig a massive, deep cavern into the earth itself.
Wow.
And then, one by one, they would hurl their weapons into the dark earth, burying them deep beneath the soil and planting a tree over the site.
By physically hiding the weapons of destruction deep inside the earth, they were making a profound psychological declaration, not just to each other, but to the world itself, that the era of violence was permanently closed.
Yes.
But what I find so fascinating about this idiom when applied to modern relationships is the sheer physical labor it implies.
That is the crucial distinction. We often think of forgiveness as a passive state, like you just decide to stop being angry.
Right.
But burying the hatchet is an active, laborious process. It highlights the massive difference between merely pausing a conflict and permanently dismantling it.
Exactly. If you have a massive fight with a colleague and you both just agree to avoid each other for a few weeks, you haven't buried the weapon. You've just put the hatchet down on the table.
It's still sitting right there in plain sight.
Yeah. The very next time there's a disagreement over a budget or a project, you can just reach out, pick it right back up, and start swinging.
But if you take a shovel, dig a deep hole, and bury it under 3 feet of dirt, you're making a conscious, strategic decision to make future conflict mechanically difficult to restart.
It's out of reach.
You're deliberately removing the tools of your own aggression from your immediate reach. By the time you get angry enough to go find a shovel, walk out to the field, and dig up the hatchet, the heat of the moment has likely passed. The physical barrier of the earth acts as an emotional buffer.
But it requires you to swallow an enormous, almost agonizing amount of pride.
Oh, absolutely.
It demands vulnerability. Think about two estranged brothers from the source examples who haven't spoken a single word to each other in 10 years. It started over a bitter disagreement about an inheritance after their parents died. 10 years of locking horns through absolute silence.
10 years of missed nieces' birthdays, awkward family holidays, and calcified resentment.
They've both suffered a decade-long war of attrition, paying the price of isolation just to maintain their self-righteousness.
But then, they both end up at their younger sister's wedding.
Right, and the hatchets are resting right there on the table. One of those brothers has to make the terrifying, ego-crushing choice to be the first one to move. He has to walk across the crowded room, extend a hand, look his rival in the eye, and decide that having a brother for the rest of his life is fundamentally more valuable than being right about a bank account 10 years ago.
It's an excruciatingly heavy hatchet to lift and bury, but it's the only way to break the cycle.
Or look at the corporate equivalent. Two rival tech companies have spent 7 years trying to bleed each other dry in patent courts and price wars. It's a slow, agonizing descent for both of them. Suddenly, a massive, heavily funded foreign competitor enters their market space, threatening to instantly render both of their products obsolete.
The ultimate external threat.
Exactly. If they keep fighting each other, they will both be annihilated. The two CEOs have to get into a room, swallow their massive egos, call off the legal attack dogs, bury the hatchet, and actually agree to integrate their software architectures to survive the new threat.
It requires the profound maturity to recognize that your nemesis is not a demon sent to torment you, but simply another entity with competing interests. And sometimes, aligning those interests is the only way to avoid the Pyrrhic victory.
It is the ultimate evolution of the hero. Knowing how to fight is important, but knowing how to dismantle the battlefield is what actually ensures survival.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
So let's take a deep breath and look back at the incredible emotional and psychological terrain we just traversed. We charted the complete life cycle of human rivalry. We started at the very beginning with the desperate need to establish a boundary and force an ultimatum by drawing a line in the sand.
And we saw how the failure of that boundary inevitably leads to the violently intimate, stubbornly destructive crash of locking horns.
We watched that explosive energy burn out, dragging both sides into the muddy, agonizing endurance test of a war of attrition where the only strategy is outsuffering the enemy.
Looking through the smoke of that conflict, we experienced the terrifying ego death of realizing our opponent was our absolute equal, forcing us to meet our match.
We analyzed the grim, horrifying math of fighting that equal to the bitter end, only to achieve a catastrophic Pyrrhic victory that destroys the winner.
And finally, we explored the immense labor and profound maturity required to short-circuit that cycle of destruction by choosing to bury the hatchet.
It is a heavy journey, but an absolutely necessary one to understand. And as always, we want to turn the lens back onto you, the listener. The deep dive isn't just about history. It's about how you navigate your own world.
Take a moment today to audit your own conflicts. Think about your career, your family dynamics, your personal boundaries. Have you ever been pushed to a point where you had to draw a line in the sand, where you had to look a boss, a partner, or a friend in the eye and say, this far and absolutely no further, knowing full well you are risking the relationship to protect your integrity?
Or, to look at the darker side of the mirror, have you ever engineered your own Pyrrhic victory? Have you ever pushed so hard to win an argument, to prove you were the smartest person in the room, that you got your way, but you looked around at the collateral damage and realized the cost was infinitely higher than the prize?
We've all been there. Reflecting on those moments of overextension is how we train ourselves to recognize the escalation patterns in our next inevitable rivalry, allowing us to navigate it with more strategic foresight and emotional grace.
Absolutely. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. It builds directly on that final beautiful concept of burying the hatchet to end a conflict.
Okay.
We focus so much on the relief of getting the weapon out of sight. But if you really think about the physical reality of that metaphor, well, it leaves you with a haunting question. What happens to the soil you bury it in?
Oh, that is a deeply unsettling angle to consider.
Right. Because metal rusts.
Yeah.
Wood